Dr. Krelvor adjusted his six-fingered appendages on the hovering medical terminal, his iridescent scales shifting from their usual calm blue to a perplexed purple. The Galactic Central Medical Facility on Station Q-459 had seen its fair share of peculiar cases, but nothing quite prepared him for what walked through the door that day. "Good morning. Or is it evening? Hard to tell in space, right?" The human, Victoria Chen, practically bounced into the examination room, despite what the initial scans indicated was a compound fracture in her left fibula. Her vitals showed elevated endorphin levels, and she was smiling. "Please remain still for preliminary scan, human Chen," Dr. Krelvor's translator chirped, while his secondary heart rate increased with concern. The medical bay's white walls pulsed with soft, healing bioluminescence, a feature that usually soothed patients. But this human seemed to need no soothing at all. Behind him, 3 junior residents, their tentacles twisting in nervous anticipation, monitored the holographic displays. Dr. Mirathol, the youngest, nearly dropped her neural scanner when the complete skeletal analysis appeared. "Human Chen," Dr. Krelvor began, his voice modulator struggling to maintain a professional tone. "Your current injury appears to be your 14th bone fracture. The regenerative facilities are available immediately, yet I notice from your records that you have declined standard treatment 8 times in the past." Victoria grinned even wider, pulling out her phone. "Oh yeah, check this out. This is from when I got the last one climbing El Capitan back on Earth. See how gnarly that break was? I went old school, used a cast and everything. The stories you get from injuries are half the fun." The medical readout panel near Dr. Krelvor began to flash warning signals as his scales shifted rapidly between purple and green. One of the junior residents quietly activated the staff stress response protocols. "Fun," Dr. Krelvor repeated the word, as if it were a newly discovered pathogen. "Human Chen, perhaps there has been a translation error. You intentionally allowed your body to repair itself through primitive means, for entertainment value." "Well, when you say it like that, it sounds weird," Victoria laughed, still scrolling through her injury photos with obvious pride. "But come on, every scar tells a story. Though I guess I should probably get this one fixed up proper. Got a wingsuit jump plan next week." The stress response system began dispensing calming pheromones into the medical bay's air circulation. Dr. Krelvor's scales finally settled on a mottled pattern that most closely translated to existential confusion. "Begin official medical log addendum," he spoke to the facility's AI. "I believe we may need to revise our understanding of human psychological profiles." Again. The junior residents exchanged knowing looks with their eye stalks. It was going to be one of those days at Galactic Central Medical. "Now then," Victoria chirped, "about that wingsuit jump." "So there I was, halfway down this volcanic vent on Europa," Victoria explained cheerfully, gesturing with her good arm, while her broken one dangled uselessly at her side. "The sulfur jets were absolutely spectacular. But then my magnet anchors failed, and well—" She shrugged, wincing slightly. Gravity had some opinions about that. Dr. Krelvor's medical scanner clattered to the floor. His assistant rushed to retrieve it, nearly colliding with Dr. Mirathal, who had frozen in place, her 4 eyes widened to their fullest extent. "You willingly descended into an active geological formation?" Dr. Mirathal's voice modulator crackled with disbelief. "For recreation?" "Oh yeah, the crystals down there are amazing. Look." Victoria reached into her pocket with her functioning arm and pulled out several glowing mineral specimens. "Worth a couple broken ribs and a dislocated shoulder, don't you think?" The medical bay's atmospheric sensors detected an immediate spike in stress pheromones from all 6 alien medical staff present. Dr. Krelvor's scales had shifted to an entirely new color that the medical system's sensors struggled to classify. "These injuries," Dr. Mirathal consulted her floating diagnostic panel, her tentacles twitching nervously, "include 3 fractured ribs, a completely dislocated right shoulder, second-degree burns on 15% of your epidermis, and trace amounts of highly toxic sulfur compounds in your bloodstream, And you're smiling? Well, yeah, personal best for depth in a volcanic dive. Wait until my climbing club hears about this. Victoria attempted to sit up, causing several monitoring devices to shriek in alarm. Speaking of which, how long will the regenerative treatment take? I've got a free climbing expedition on Mars next week that I really don't want to miss. Dr. Mirathal turned all four eyes toward Dr. Krelvor, silently pleading for guidance. The senior physician had begun making a sound that the translation software couldn't quite process. Human Chen, Dr. Krelvor finally managed, his voice modulator struggling to maintain composure. Our records indicate that last month you declined regenerative treatment for a fractured ankle sustained while, and I quote, attempting to surf atmospheric storms on Venus. Oh, right, that was wild. Did you know you can catch sick waves in the upper Venusian atmosphere? Though the acid clouds are a bit rough on the equipment. Victoria pulled out her phone again. Want to see the video? My suit camera caught the whole thing. Dr. Mirathal's medical assistant droid quietly began dispensing anxiety medication to the medical staff. Two of the nurses had their environmental suit's opacity settings turned to maximum, unable to watch anymore. Perhaps, Dr. Mirathal suggested carefully, we should discuss implementing a mandatory psychological evaluation protocol for human patients. Tried that last year, Dr. Krelvor replied wearily. The evaluating psychiatrist requested immediate transfer to a less stressful posting. They now work in a Class 12 pandemic response unit. They said it was more relaxing. Victoria beamed at them both. Hey, while you're fixing me up, would you mind taking a look at this weird bite I got from this amazing creature I found in the sulfur pools? It's got this cool bioluminescent venom that makes your blood glow. I named it Sparky. Ames, the medical bay's AI automatically initiated emergency stress protocols as Dr. Mirathal's colour shifted to what could only be described as screaming. Dr. Krelvor made a note to requisition more anxiety medication for the medical staff. They were definitely going to need it. Begin treatment protocol, he sighed, watching Victoria enthusiastically show her glowing bite mark to a horrified nurse. And someone please contact the xenobiology department about Sparky. He paused, then added, and perhaps update the human patient warning classification. Again. The medical base systems hummed to life, while Victoria happily planned her next adventure, completely oblivious to the existential crisis she had sparked among the galaxy's finest medical professionals. Pull up the complete medical history, Dr. Krelvor commanded the hovering display, while Victoria cheerfully texted her adventure group about her latest exploits. The holographic scan bloomed to life, and every medical professional in the room took an involuntary step backward. Dr. Mirathal's tentacles curled in shock as she read through the list. 27 bone fractures, 13 major lacerations, 4 concussions, 2 cases of severe frostbite, multiple instances of radiation exposure and... Is that antimatter burn scarring? Oh, yeah. Victoria perked up. That was from this amazing solar sail race through the Kuiper Belt. Had a small containment issue with the drive. No big deal, though. Just a light scorching. The medical staff huddled around a secondary console. Their voices dropped to worried whispers. The senior nurse's exoskeleton was clicking rapidly, a sure sign of distress. Look at these regenerative treatment timestamps, Dr. Mirathal pointed with a trembling appendage. She waited 6 weeks to seek treatment for a shattered collarbone. The notes say she insisted on finishing something called a triathlon first. Swimming, cycling, and running in sequence, Dr. Krelvor explained wearily. Humans do it for fun. He pronounced the last word like it was a particularly puzzling medical condition. The scan rotated, revealing more historical data. A junior nurse made a high-pitched keening sound and had to be escorted to the relaxation chamber. According to these records, Dr. Mirathal continued, her voice modulator crackling with disbelief, she has declined immediate regenerative treatment approximately 60% of the time, opting instead for what humans call natural healing or primitive casting methods. Victoria, overhearing this, swung her legs cheerfully off the examination table. You should see my collection of old casts. Got all my climbing buddies to sign them. There's this really cool one from when I broke both legs, trying to paraglide through the rings of Saturn. Dr. Krelvor's scales shifted through 3 distinct colours before settling on a deeply troubled mauve. Human Chen, our records also show you have an active subscription to no less than 8 different emergency medical evacuation services across the solar system. Well, yeah, Victoria shrugged with her good shoulder. You've got to be prepared. Though the one on Io keeps threatening to cancel my coverage. Something about too many claims near active volcanoes. Their loss, really. The medical AI pinged urgently, highlighting a pattern in her neural scans. Dr. Mirathol leaned in closer, her eye stalks extending in fascination. These readings, they show elevated endorphin levels during all recorded incidents. Are you suggesting, Human Chen, that you derive pleasure from these potentially fatal activities? Totally. Nothing beats the rush of free climbing an ice cliff on Europa, though base jumping into Olympus Mons comes pretty close. Victoria pulled out her phone again. Want to see the footage? 3 more medical staff quietly excused themselves to the relaxation chamber. Dr. Krelevor made a note to requisition additional stress relief pheromones for the entire department. I believe, he announced to the remaining staff, we need to convene an emergency meeting of the Xenological Psychology Board. And perhaps, he added, watching Victoria scroll through what appeared to be a gallery of increasingly concerning injury photos, request hazard pay for the human ward. The medical bay's AI quietly updated its threat assessment protocols, adding human recreational activities to its list of unexplainable phenomena, right between quantum paradoxes and the inexplicable human addiction to something called caffeine. The medical staff review meeting was interrupted by a commotion in the emergency teleport bay. Marcus Rodriguez materialized on the platform, sporting what appeared to be several severe plasma burns and a bright grin that matched Victoria's. Dude, Vic, did you try that solar flare surfing spot I told you about? Marcus called out, casually brushing off some still smoking pieces of his protective suit. Dr. Krelvor's scales went from troubled mauve to outright alarmed crimson. Another one, he whispered to Dr. Mirathol. Activate containment protocols. Marky Mark, you made it! Victoria waved her good arm enthusiastically. How close did you get to the chromosphere this time? So close, bro. Almost touched it before my shield started melting. Check out these sweet burns. The medical bay's AI immediately began dispatching sedatives to the medical staff. Dr. Mirathal pulled up Marcus's records on the floating display, then immediately wished she hadn't. Solar flare surfing, asteroid parkour, neutron star diving. She read aloud, her voice modulator glitching with each new entry. Attempted to race a comet, deliberately. Got second place, too. Marcus beamed, pointing to what appeared to be a trophy-shaped burn scar on his arm. Would have won if my propulsion unit hadn't frozen in the tail debris. Dr. Krelvor turned to the assembled medical staff, who were all trying to hide behind their diagnostic panels. Begin comprehensive review of all human patient records. We need to understand the scope of this behavior. The holographic displays filled with data, each new file causing more distress among the alien medical professionals. A nurse's exoskeleton began stress molting. Look at these statistics, Dr. Mirathol gestured with 3 trembling tentacles. Humans deliberately engaging in activities with mortality rates exceeding 15%. For recreation, they call it extreme sports. You should see the low-orbit wingsuit racing circuit, Marcus chimed in, attempting to high-five Victoria with his less burned arm. Now that's extreme, though the Martian Canyon Gliding League is getting pretty wild too. Please remain still for decontamination, Dr. Krelvor pleaded, though both humans were now enthusiastically comparing burn patterns. And stop touching each other's injuries. The medical AI flagged another set of records, these ones causing Dr. Mirathal's eye stalks to fully retract in shock. According to this data, humans regularly engage in recreational activities that our safety protocols classify as extinction-level dangerous, suicidally reckless, or, and I quote, "Why would any sentient being do this?" "Oh man, wait until you hear about free solo climbing," Marcus grinned. "It's like regular climbing, except you don't use any safety equipment at all." The remaining conscious medical staff huddled together, their various appendages shaking. Dr. Krelvor accessed the central database, pulling up more human medical records. Each new file seemed worse than the last. Deep sea cave diving, volcano boarding, something called bull running. He read, his scales shifting through colors the medical sensors couldn't even classify. "And they do this voluntarily? For fun?" Victoria and Marcus chorused together, then launched into an animated discussion about something called ghost pepper eating contests. Dr. Mirathol's translation software crashed trying to process the concept. "But we have perfect virtual reality simulations, safe ones, with zero risk of actual death." "Boring," Marcus declared. "Nothing beats the real thing." "Hey Vic, remember that time we tried to skydive through Saturn's rings?" "Do not tell that story," Dr. Krelvor interrupted quickly, noticing several junior staff members starting to sway unsteadily. "The insurance adjusters are still processing the claims from your last adventure." The medical bay's AI pinged urgently, noting that the relaxation chamber was now at full capacity with traumatized medical staff. Dr. Krelvor made a note to request additional chambers and stronger sedatives. "Perhaps," Dr. Mirathol suggested weakly, watching the two humans compare what appeared to be magma surfing techniques, "we should update the Galactic Medical Guide's entry on humans." "Agreed," Dr. Krelvor nodded, his scales finally settling on a resigned grey. "Current classification: Deathworlders with apparent immunity to self-preservation instincts. And a concerning addiction to adrenaline," Dr. Mirathol added, as Marcus pulled out his phone to show footage of something called space tornado chasing. The medical bay's systems hummed soothingly, trying to calm the increasingly distressed alien staff, while Victoria and Marcus happily planned their next life-threatening adventure. Somewhere in the background, the insurance processing unit began quietly weeping. Dr. Krelvor arranged the holographic displays in a semicircle, each one showing increasingly concerning data about human recreational activities. Dr. James Wong, the station's human medical liaison, sat across from him, calmly sipping something called coffee. "So let me understand this correctly," Dr. Krelvor began, his scales flickering between confusion and concern. "These base jumping statistics are normal?" "Oh, those numbers are just from last month," Dr. Wong chuckled, pulling up more files. "Wait until you see the annual reports from Mars Olympus Mons Diving League." Dr. Mirathol, who had insisted on attending the meeting, made a sound that her translator couldn't process. But according to these records, 32% of all human recreational activities have a significant chance of severe bodily harm. "Only 32%? Dr. Wong raised an eyebrow. "Must be a slow month. Did you include the new underwater volcano exploration teams?" The medical AI automatically dispensed stress relief medication to both alien doctors. Dr. Krelvor's scales had settled into a permanent state of distressed pulsing. "But why?" he asked, gesturing to a holographic display showing humans purposefully jumping out of perfectly functional spacecraft. "We have provided your species with advanced regenerative technology, virtual reality simulations, and safe recreational alternatives." Dr. Wong grinned, reminding them uncomfortably of Victoria. "Where's the fun in that? Besides, half the appeal is the story you get to tell afterward. Have you heard about the new trend in Jupiter storm chasing? The medical base systems registered Dr. Mirathal's vital signs approaching critical stress levels. She quickly accessed her personal calming pheromone dispenser. "Our research indicates," Dr. Krelvor continued, trying to maintain his professional composure, "that humans actively seek out activities that trigger something called an adrenaline rush. But these same activities frequently result in severe trauma, broken bones, radiation exposure, and in some cases, Temporary molecular destabilization. You should see what happens at the annual Quantum Surfing Championship. Dr. Wong nodded enthusiastically. Last year, 3 competitors temporarily existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Made for some great photos. Dr. Mirathal's tentacles curled in horror. The medical cleanup crew needed therapy afterward. For 6 months. Look, Dr. Wong leaned forward, still clutching his coffee. Humans have always pushed boundaries. It's kind of our thing. You give us safer equipment, we just use it to do even more dangerous stuff. It's a cycle. The holographic displays shifted to show historical data. Dr. Krelvor's scales transitioned to a new shade of distress as he read. According to this, when humans invented better safety gear for something called boxing, they responded by creating a sport called ultra boxing, in zero gravity, with jetpacks. Oh yeah, the Zero-G Fighting League. Great entertainment, though we had to ban the laser gloves after that incident with the station's shield generators. The medical AI pinged urgently, noting that the stress levels in the room were exceeding safety parameters. Dr. Mirathal had begun stress molting. So what you're saying, Dr. Krelvor summarized weakly, is that providing humans with better medical technology has only encouraged them to attempt even more dangerous activities.
Exactly, Dr. Wong beamed. Now that we know you can put us back together, sky's not even the limit anymore. Speaking of which, want to hear about the new trend in black hole proximity challenges?
The medical bay's systems automatically initiated emergency calming protocols as both alien doctors slumped in their seats. Somewhere in the distance they could hear Victoria and Marcus excitedly planning something called antimatter kayaking. Dr. Krelvor made a final note in his research log. Conclusion: humans don't need safety features. They need restraining orders from the laws of physics. Dr. Krelvor stared at the latest arrival to his medical bay with what could only be described as preemptive exhaustion. Nina Patel sat on the examination table, chunks of asteroids still embedded in her climbing gear, reading through what appeared to be a guide to something called free-climbing neutron stars. According to these brain scans, Dr. Mirathal announced, gesturing to the floating displays with notably unsteady tentacles, the human brain actually produces pleasure chemicals when engaging in near-death experiences. Oh, totally, Nina looked up from her guide. Nothing beats that rush when you're hanging by your fingertips over a 1,000-foot drop. Though space climbing adds this whole new dimension to it. Did you know some asteroids have magnetic fields that make your hair stand up right before you fall? The medical AI quietly updated its psychological assessment protocols to include a new category. Humans. But the last time you were here, Dr. Krelvor pointed out, his scales shifting to a concerned chartreuse, you had fallen 3 kilometers down a crevasse on Europa. Best fall ever. Nina grinned, pulling out her phone. Want to see the video? The ice crystals made this amazing pattern as I was plummeting. Almost forgot to activate my emergency shield because I was too busy admiring the view. Dr. Mirathal's tentacles curled in synchronized horror. The psychological profile indicates that your species actively seeks out situations that trigger the release of chemicals like adrenaline, dopamine, and endorphins. But these same situations have a statistically significant chance of causing death. That's what makes it exciting. Nina beamed, showing them footage of her latest climb. See that glowing crack in the asteroid? That's where the radiation leak was. Made the whole climb way more interesting. Had to finish before my radiation badges turned black. The medical bay's stress monitoring system began automatically dispensing calming agents to the entire staff. A junior nurse had to be escorted out after seeing Nina's collection of what she called close call photos. We've analyzed thousands of human medical records, Dr. Krelvor said, pulling up more holographic data. The pattern is consistent. The more dangerous the activity, the more humans seem to enjoy it. There's even a direct correlation between proximity to death and what you call fun. Speaking of fun, Nina perked up. Did you guys know there's this amazing climbing route through the upper atmosphere of Venus? The acid clouds make it super tricky. But if you time it right with the lightning storms... Dr. Mirathol's translation software crashed trying to process the concept of purposefully climbing through acid clouds. The medical AI began preemptively preparing the relaxation chamber. Our research suggests, Dr. Krelvor continued, trying to ignore Nina's enthusiastic description of Venusian lightning dodging, that humans have evolved to not just survive dangerous situations, but to actively seek them out. It's as if your entire species has developed an immunity to normal fear responses. Fear is just excitement in need of a perspective shift, Nina declared, showing them her collection of melted climbing gear. Check out what happened when I tried to scale that active fusion reactor last week. The remaining medical staff huddled together in the corner, their various appendages trembling. Dr. Krelvor's scales had settled into a new pattern that the medical censors classified as existential dread. But we have provided perfectly safe alternatives, Dr. Mirathol protested weakly. Virtual reality systems that can simulate any experience without risk. Nina rolled her eyes. Where's the fun in that? If there's no chance of actual death, what's even the point? By the way, anyone want to join my expedition next week? We're going to try surfing the event horizon of a small black hole. The medical bay's AI immediately began ordering stronger sedatives for the entire department. Dr. Krelvor made a note to update the human ward's classification from high-risk to reality-defying. I believe, he announced to his trembling staff, watching Nina enthusiastically plan her next brush with death. We need to accept that human recreational activities exist in a category beyond our comprehension. Perhaps we should just focus on having enough regenerative pods ready. And better insurance coverage, Dr. Mirathol added, as Nina showed them plans for something called antimatter rock climbing. The medical bay hummed soothingly, trying to calm its increasingly traumatized alien staff, while Nina happily explained how close you had to get to a neutron star before gravity made climbing really challenging. In the background, the station's insurance processing unit spontaneously initiated its own emergency shutdown protocol. Dr. Krelvor stood before the Galactic Medical Council's floating displays, his scales having settled into what his staff now called human-induced resignation blue. The council members watched in stunned silence as footage played of Victoria, Marcus and Nina attempting something they called synchronized supernova surfing. After extensive research, Dr. Krelvor announced, we have come to several conclusions about human recreational activities. First, providing them with better medical technology does not discourage dangerous behavior. It merely encourages them to attempt even more hazardous activities. The council chambers erupted in concerned murmurs as the footage showed Nina attempting a backflip through a radiation belt. Second, Dr. Mirathol added, her tentacles wrapped protectively around her diagnostic panel, traditional risk assessment protocols do not apply to humans. What other species classify as near certain death, humans categorize as, and I quote, totally epic bro. The footage shifted to show Marcus using an asteroid's rotation to launch himself toward a solar flare. Several council members had to activate their personal shielding to avoid stress fainting. Our new policy recommendations are simple, Dr. Krelvor continued. Triple the regenerative pod capacity in all human wards. Install emergency teleporters within range of all known extreme sports locations. And most importantly, stop trying to convince them to be safe. It only makes them more creative. A council member raised a trembling appendage. But the insurance costs have already exceeded the GDP of 3-star systems, Dr. Krelvor nodded. However, we've discovered humans are willing to pay premium rates for what they call epic coverage plans. The displays showed Victoria testing what appeared to be a quantum tunneling snowboard. 2 council members immediately requested retirement. In conclusion, Dr. Mirathol summarized, we recommend classifying human recreational activities under a new category, incomprehensible but inevitable. Our job is not to prevent them from attempting the impossible, but rather to ensure we have enough medical staff on duty when they succeed. Or when they fail spectacularly, Dr. Krelvor added, watching footage of Nina attempting to high-five a plasma anomaly. The council chambers filled with resigned sighs and the soft whir of anxiety medication dispensers. The final policy recommendation flashed across the screens. Accept that humans will continue to challenge fundamental laws of physics for fun. Budget accordingly. Just then an emergency alert pinged. Victoria, Marcus and Nina had somehow combined zero-gravity parkour with antimatter juggling near a temporal anomaly. Dr. Krelevor's scale shifted to what could only be described as, "Here we go again, purple." As the medical teams rushed to their stations, Dr. Mirathal made one final note in the official record. Humans don't see regenerative treatment as medical care. They see it as a reset button for their next impossible adventure. The Galactic Medical Council unanimously approved the new policies, then immediately approved funding for an expanded medical staff therapy program. They were definitely going to need it. Somewhere in the distance they could hear Victoria planning something called superluminal skateboarding. The insurance processors began crying again.